In the last part, we set up multiplayer and we replicated the deck, so when a card is drawn on one instance, it's reflected on the other instance. In this video, we're going to use that exact same RPC method to replicate when you place a card on the field and the attacks. So we're finished working in the deck script for now, so I'm going to open up the card manager script and I'm going to come down to the finish drag function, and this is where the logic is handled when we place a card on the field. And when a card is placed, we want to replicate that for our opponent. So before this code where we change the card being dragged scale and z-index and things like that for when we place it in a slot, let's make a couple lines here and make sure that the indentation is at the same level as this code below. And we'll call a new function called play card here and for client's opponent. And we're calling it locally, but let's also call it for all the connected clients. And then we'll come down here and create this function. And for now, let's just pass in here. And we're going to be doing the exact same method as before, so let's just go back into the deck script and we'll copy this line where we're getting player ID and we'll paste it here above where we're calling the functions, make sure the indentation is at the same level. And now where we're calling our new function, we're going to pass in player ID, make sure to pass it in on both lines. Then down in our function, we'll take it in. Then we'll go back to the deck script. And in our RPC function, we'll copy this line, this if statement, if multiplayer.getUniqueID equals player ID. Then we'll bring this over to the card manager and paste it into our new function. And then don't forget, because this is an RPC function, we have to add this tag up here right above the function. And then we'll pass in this if statement, and then we'll create an else statement, and we'll pass in there too. And we also want to take in the card that was placed into this function. So up here, we'll pass in card being dragged, and don't forget to pass it into the RPC as well. And then we'll take it in down here in the function. And now let's print card in both the if and the else, because I want to show you something that we didn't cover in the last video. Now if we give this a run, we'll host on one instance, join on the other, then we'll go to the host and we'll play a night. And if we go to the Godot output and look what printed, you can see when this was called locally, it prints the card fine. But when this is called on the RPC on the other machine, it takes in this encoded object, which we don't want. Because you can see if I try to print a property like card.name or something, if I give this a run now, you'll see it gets an error because we can't do or check anything with the encoded object. And there's a couple of ways to get around this. We can either pass in a path to the node instead of a reference to the node, or what we're going to do here is we're just going to pass in the name of the card being dragged. When the cards are being instantiated, we give them a name like card 1, card 2, card 3. So instead of passing in a reference to the card that was just placed, we can just pass in the name of the card that was just placed. So in our RPC function, I changed card to card name, and then I updated that in the two places we're printing it. And now up where we're calling this function, we'll pass in card being dragged dot name, and don't forget to do that where we're calling it locally and where we're doing the RPC. And you can see if I test this now, it prints fine with no errors. Now this is only half done because we have the card name, but we do want a reference to the card. So in this if statement, I'm going to replace this print, and since all the cards are child of card manager, I'm going to do get node, and then we can just pass in card name here, and now that will get a reference to the card. Remember, we can't pass a reference directly into this function, so this is how we're getting around that. Now you can see when we give this a play and we place one of our cards, we get this error cannot convert argument from string path to node path. We can fix that by coming up here where we're passing in card being dragged dot name and just surround it with the string function to make sure we're passing in a string. Make sure to put in those two closing brackets as well. Then back down here in our function, we'll store this card reference in a new variable called myCard. And now let's print myCard to make sure it gets the reference. If we give this a test now and place our card, you can see in the output that we are getting our card reference printed successfully. Now below where we're calling this function, we have all these lines of code, which is the logic for placing the card onto the field. So I'm going to go through these one by one. I'm going to cut the card being dragged.scale line, and I'll put it down here below the if and else statements. Make sure the indentation is the same as I have it here. And we'll do the same for the z index line. And now for the is hovering on card equals false. We only want to do that if this function was called locally, so we'll put it in here in the if statement. Then for the card being dragged.card slot card is in equals card slot found, we'll put that with the two other lines down here at the bottom. Then we'll cut the remove card from hand line and we'll paste it in here in the if statement because we only need it if this was called locally. Then we'll get the card being dragged.position line. Only need this if it was called locally. Then we'll get the card slot found.card in slot equals true. We'll put this down at the bottom. We need it either way. And then we'll get this line to disable the collision of the card slot found. And we only need this if it was called locally. And now you can see we're getting some errors because card slot found doesn't exist in this scope. So at the top of this function, I'm going to declare two new variables, I'm going to declare a variable called card and one called card slot. And now we'll assign card in the if statement, which is if this function is called locally. Instead of var my card, we'll do card equals getNode card name. And then in the else, which is if this function was called from up here, we'll do card equals. And then we want to get a reference to the opponent field. So we'll do getParent, .getParent to get to main. And then we'll do .getNode opponent field / card manager / and then we'll do plus card name. So that's card assigned now. In the if statement, I have my card here. I'm going to change that for card. And also card being dragged to top position. We can change this to card top position. That's everything we have to change there. So that's card finished. Next, we have to assign card slot. So in the if statement, I'll say card slot equals, and I'll drag in a reference to our card slots node, and I'll do .getNode. And then we have to pass in the card slot the card was placed in. So we'll take in a card slot name. And then up where we're calling this function, we'll pass in card slot found.name and make sure to surround that with the string function, same as we did for the card name. And don't forget to pass that into the RPC as well. Then back down in our function, I called this card slot by mistake. I changed that to card slot. Then when we have getNode, we'll pass in card slot name into here. And now we just have to assign the card slot in the else. So we'll do card slot equals, and we'll copy this above where we're getting a reference to the opponent field, and then we'll do a / and put card slots instead of card manager, and then / end quotes, and then plus and put the card slot name. So it'll get a reference to that card slot. Then anywhere in the if where we have card slot found, we'll replace that with card slot. And then down here with these lines at the bottom, we want to change card being dragged to card, and anywhere we have card slot found, we'll change to card slot. Now if this was called from up here, there's a few more things we want to do to replicate the card being placed for the opponent. Now instead of doing this getParent.getParent.getNode opponent field every time, let's just create a new variable called opponent field reference, and we'll set it equal to getParent.getParent.getNode opponent field. And now we can swap this out when we're assigning the card and the card slot, so we can just do opponent field ref.getNode, and then whatever we're trying to get like card manager or card slots. Now we want to remove the card from the opponent's hand. So we can do opponent field ref.getNode opponent hand.remove card from hand, passing in the card to remove. And then we want to change the card's position to the position of the card slot. And when this function is called locally, we just change the position, which is okay because the card is already hovering over the card slot. It doesn't have far to move, so it just snaps to the card slot basically. But if this is called from up here, the card is going to be moving from the opponent's hand all the way onto the field into the card slot. So that'll look weird if that happens instantly, so we want to tween instead. And if we go into the player hand script, we already have this code done. We can just copy these two tween lines, and we'll come back into our card manager and paste it into our function at the bottom of the else. Make sure the first thing you're passing in is the card that you want to move. We want to change the position, and then where we want to put it is card slot.position. And we already have a constant at the top here called default card move speed, so we can use that for the speed. And now also remember that you can't see your opponent's cards, but we want to be able to see it now that they've played it. So let's go into the deck script where we have this card.getNode animation player.play card flip, which just flips the card from back to front so you can see the image and see what card it is. And we can paste this line in here as well. Make sure the start is just card.getNode. Now in the battle manager, we have this opponent cards on battlefield variable. It's an array, so before I forget, let's drag in a battle manager reference and append the card being placed into this array. So we can give this a run now to see if we got any errors, and we'll play a card for the host, and we get invalid access to property or key position on a base null instance. That could be for card or card slot. I think it's card slot. And yeah, if we look in the errors tab here, you can see can't find the card slot. And that's because in our opponent field, we have them named enemy card slot 1, 2, 3. And on our player field, they're just called card slot 1, 2, 3, etc. So we have to line these up to be the same. So in the player field, I'm going to say this top left card slot is card slot 1, and then the one beside it is card slot 2, and then 3, 4, 5. And then the one on the bottom left is going to be 6, and then the one beside it is 7, then 8, 9, 10. So we're just renaming all those nodes. And once that's done, we can come over to the opponent field. And we want to rename all these card slot nodes as well. And keep in mind that we want them to be in the same position. And that the enemy field is basically just rotated 180 degrees. So this bottom right card slot is going to be card slot 1. Then the one to the left of it will be card slot 2. Then the left of it card slot 3. All the way to card slot 5, and then the top right one will be card slot 6, the one on the left of that 7, left of that 8, 9, and then 10. And if we give this a test now, and we play a card for the host, you can see on the other instance that the card was played, And you can see there's only 4 cards in the opponent's hand now, so that works. But the host played a knight card and an archer card was placed, and that's a problem in the deck script that we'll fix next. So if we go into the deck script, you can see that in the draw card function, we're choosing a random card to draw. And also if we go over to the opponent deck script, in the draw card function here, we're also choosing a random card to draw, but instead we need to be passing in the card that was drawn into this function. Otherwise the opponent's hand will be full of random cards instead of being full of the cards that the other player drew. So in the opponent deck script, we can get rid of the opponent deck array. And in the ready function, we'll get rid of this line shuffling the deck. And then in the draw card function, we can get rid of these 2 lines. And here as well, where we're checking if the deck size equals 0, don't need that. And then let's take in the card drawn name. We can get rid of this line as well with the rich text label.text. Then back in the deck script, we'll go to the draw card function here. Let's cut this line that says var card drawn name equals, and we'll paste it at the very top of our for loop, where we're looping to draw our initial hand. Then let's pass this card drawn name into our draw here and for client's opponent function, and make sure to pass it in the RPC as well. And then let's take it in down in our RPC function. And if this function was called from up here, where we're calling draw card for the opponent, we'll pass in card drawn name into there. Now if you remember, there's a second place where we're calling our RPC function, and it's in the deck clicked function. So I'm going to copy this line that says var card drawn name equals, and it's getting a random card from the deck. I'm going to copy that, I'm going to come down to deck clicked and I'm going to paste it in here. And then where we're calling our RPC function, I'm going to pass that in there. Make sure you pass it in for the RPC and locally. And then in the draw card function, we're going to take in card drawn name. And then up here where we're calling draw card, make sure to pass in card drawn name. Then back in the draw card function, if the player deck dot size equals 0, after we've erased the card that was drawn from player deck, instead of setting both of these things visible equal to false, we can just set visible equals false to hide the whole deck. And now you can run this to give it a test. And you'll see if we play a knight card, the opponent on the other instance should also play a knight card. And we can also try this using a different card like a demon just to make sure, and you can see that works too. Then the last thing we have to do here is go to the opponent deck script, and we have to update the rich text label deck count. So let's do deck size minus equals 1, and then before that we'll check if deck size minus 1 equals 0, then we'll just hide the deck. But otherwise we'll do the deck size minus equals 1, and then we'll update the rich text label, so I'll drag in a reference to it, and I'll do dot text equals, I'll use the string function, and pass in deck size. So that should be all the deck stuff finished. Now let's come over to the battle manager, and at the top we have this variable is opponent's turn, and we don't need this, so I'm going to delete it. And then in the card manager, I'm going to search for is opponent's turn, and we use it here in card clicked, so I'm just going to delete this condition and the return after it. Then if we come back into the battle manager script, we can search for is opponent's turn and delete any of the lines that have it. Then we can delete this whole try play card with highest attack function because that's for enemy AI. Then we can come up to the top here and get rid of this empty monster card slots array, don't need it, and get rid of it anywhere else it appears in the script. Then this function opponent's turn, we can get rid of this, get rid of up here where we're calling it. We can also get rid of the end opponent turn function. And I think that's all of the AI enemy stuff gotten rid of now. So let's work on the last thing we have left to do, which is replicating the attack. So below our direct attack function, I'll create a new RPC function, make sure to add that tag, the RPC tag, and I'll call the function direct attack here and replicate client opponent. You can probably call this something much better, I just can't think of it. And now up in the direct attack function, we can get rid of attacker, we don't need to pass that in anymore. And then we can take everything from this else up to var new pos y, we don't need any of that, get rid of it, and now we'll indent all this stuff backwards. And we can get rid of the var new pos line and the line where we're setting new pos y equal to. And now below these 3 lines at the top, we can call our new function, and we have to call it locally and for peers, so let's call it locally first, and then we'll do the line RPC and put in the name of the function there in quotes. And now everything else below this until it gets to the if attacker equals player stuff, we can cut this and paste it into our new function. Then we can get rid of that if check if attacker equals player and indent everything in there backwards. And now let's go to our card manager for a sec, and we will steal this line, we'll copy it, getting the player ID, which we've done a couple times now, and we'll paste it before we're calling our RPC function in the direct attack function. And then we'll pass it in where we're calling it locally and the RPC. Then we'll take it in down in our RPC function. And then we have this if check. I have it in my clipboard, but you can take it from any of the other RPC functions we've done, where we're checking if this function was called locally or from up here. Now we need a couple things in this function, so at the top of the function I'm going to create 2 new variables. var attacking card and var attack pos y. If this function was called locally, then attacking card is going to equal, and then I'm going to drag in a reference to the card manager and use the getNode function. And now we need to take in the name of the card that's attacking, and then we also need to pass that in. And remember, we can't pass in a reference, so that's why we're passing in a name. So we'll use the string function and pass in attacking card.name. Don't forget to pass that in locally and in the RPC. And now down here where we're getting the card manager reference .getNode, we can pass in attacking card name there. And attack pos y, if this is called locally, is going to equal 0, which I think is just the top of the screen. And now if this function was called from a peer, the attacking card is going to be on the opponent's field, so we have to do attacking card equals getParent.getParent, which will bring us to the main node, and then from there we can do .getNode opponent field / card manager / and then we'll end quotes, do a plus, and put attacking card name. And then attack pos y we'll assign to the bottom of the screen, which is 1080 for me. Then after the if and else, we'll create a new variable called new pos, and we'll set it equal to a vector2, which has attacking card.position.x for the x and attack pos y for the y. Now the only error we have left in here is that attacker is not defined in the current scope, and we're going to replace this if check with the one we already have above, if multiplayer.getUniqueID is player ID, which is the check that checks if this function was called locally or from a peer. And now I'm going to swap the places of the 2 lines of code in the else statement with the 2 lines of code in this if statement. And this commented out line here, we're going to uncomment this, and we'll go up and copy this reference to our opponent field, and then we'll do / opponent health, so we get a reference to that opponent health rich text label, and then the rest is fine. Then I'm going to minimize this function because we should be done in here. Then in the direct attack function, where we're calling this locally, I'm going to add the await keyword before we call it, so it waits for the function to complete before going to the next part of code. And I'm going to make sure to put the RPC line above the await line because we do want that to happen at the same time. And the last thing to do here is to go into the card manager script, come down to the card clicked function, and where we're calling direct attack here, we're no longer passing in the attacker, so we can get rid of player here. And now we can give this a run to see if it works. So I'll put these 2 windows side by side here, and you can see on the host, if I click the knight, it direct attacks, and that is replicated on the other instance. You can see it happen on both screens, which is amazing. Now we're almost done. The very last thing we have to do is to replicate when a card attacks another card. So let's come down below the attack function, and we'll create a new RPC function, so make sure to add that tag. And I'm going to call it attack here and replicate client opponent. It's going to take in player ID and attacking card name, same as our other RPC function. Now if we come up to our attack function, we don't need to take in an attacker, and we can get rid of this if check and indent all these lines back 1. Then below these top lines, we will call our new RPC function, and before that line, we're going to get the player ID, and then we're going to pass it in, and we'll also pass in the attacking card name. Make sure you surround it with the string function, same as before, and then we'll call the RPC for the connected peers and pass in the same stuff. Then we can cut everything below that until if attacker equals player and paste it into our new function. And then up here in the attack function, we can get rid of this if check and indent everything back. Then down in our RPC function, we'll create a new variable called attacking card. And then I'm going to copy from our last RPC function, the direct attack one, this check to check if the function was called locally or from a peer. And I took that attacking card line as well because we can reuse that. And then I'm going to create an else. And in here, we'll also copy this over from the last RPC function we made. And now this function actually needs to take in a defending card as well. So we'll take in defending card name. And up in the attack function, we'll pass in defending card name. Make sure to do it locally and for the RPC. Then in our RPC function, we'll create a variable defending card below attacking card. And then we'll assign it in the if, we'll do defending card equals. And we can just copy this reference to our opponent's card manager below from the else, but give it the defending card name, and that will get that reference. And in the else, if this was called from a peer, defending card will equal, and then we'll just drag in our card manager reference, .getNode defending card name. Then I'm going to create a new variable up here at the top called y_offset. And if this was called locally, we'll assign y_offset equal to, and then let's go to the top of this script and we have this battle pos offset constant. I'm going to use this, and then I'll copy this line, I'll go into the else, so if this was not called locally, and we'll set it equal to minus battle pos offset. And this is for when we animate the card to attack another card, so that the attacking card doesn't go all the way onto the card it's attacking, it stops just short at whatever offset we give it. Then down here where we have this line var new pos equals vector 2, where we have battle pos here, let's swap this out for our new y offset. And then down here where we have this error, let's copy our check to check if this function was called locally or from a peer. And if the attacking card's health is 0, let's paste it in here, and we'll add an else. And in the if, we'll destroy card, attacking card, and pass in player in quotes. And for the else, we'll pass in opponent. And then we just have to copy this if statement again here and replace the if attacker equals player like so. And then the rest of it should be fine. And now if we scroll down to the destroy card function, there's a change we have to make here. We have a reference to our opponent discard, but we're going to have to swap that out. So we can take our reference to the opponent field that we've done in the RPC function, and I'll paste that here, and we'll get a reference to the opponent discard, and then make sure you have dot position there. And let's move this line card.defeated equals true. Let's cut it out of here and paste it down here out of the if and else statements. And let's just give it a run now to see if we get any errors. And it looks like we have one in the enemy card selected function. And that's because we're no longer passing in the attacker, so we can get rid of player here. And if we run this again, let's host and join. And now we have to implement the end turn button. So we'll go up to the on end turn button pressed function, and we'll call this function end turn button enabled, and we'll pass in false to disable the button, and then we'll get a reference to the input manager, and we'll set the inputs disabled variable equal to true. And then after all this stuff, we want to call an RPC function change turn, and we only need to call this for connected peers. We don't need to call it locally, just to tell the other player that it's their turn. And then we'll come down here and we'll quickly create this RPC function. We'll add the RPC tag, and we'll call the function change turn. We'll call the end turn button enabled function, but we'll pass in true. And then we'll copy the line to disable inputs, but we'll set it equal to false. And my button signal isn't firing properly, so I'm going to go into the end turn button node, go over to the node tab, going to right click on my press signal, disconnect them all, and then I'm just going to double click on pressed and reconnect it myself. I'm going to go down to the battle manager script and press connect. And then if we give this a run, we can play a knight, end our turn, and you can see the button goes away and it shows up for the other person. And if we put the screen side by side here, you can see that we can attack and it is replicated, which is so good to see. And when we press the end turn button, it shows up for the other player. But you can see when we attack and the health goes to 0, we're getting an error on this line setting the card defeated equals to true. And that's because the opponent cards don't have that variable, so we can just open up the opponent card script and add var defeated. One thing I forgot to do is to reset the draw when you end your turn. So in the change turn function, I'm going to drag in a reference to the deck and call the reset draw function. And then we want to reset being able to play a card as well, so we'll get our card manager reference and we'll call reset played monster. If you give this a test now, you should see that you're able to draw a card every time it's your turn and play a new monster every time it's your turn. And you should also see that when cards' health go to 0, they go to the discard pile. One more thing to note is that if we go into the multiplayer script, if you come up to here to const server address equals localhost, if you want to play between two different machines, say your friend's on a laptop or something, then whoever sets up the server or whoever is the host, you want to put their computer's IP address into here instead of localhost. And then whoever presses join is going to be trying to join a server with that IP address, so that's how you'd connect. I tested it on my laptop and I was able to connect to my computer and play against myself. So congratulations if you've gotten this far in the card game tutorial. The only thing we haven't replicated is the card abilities, and I didn't bother with that because hopefully you'll have different abilities to what I have, but the process of replication is going to be the exact same. Where in an RPC function, you're checking if this code is being called locally or from a different computer, and depending on which, you either make the code changes for yourself or you update the opponent's field. But that's going to be everything for this video. If you have any more video ideas of where you'd like to take this card game or possible tutorials I could do, let me know in the comments. And apart from that, leave a like if you found the video helpful and subscribe for more upcoming game dev content.